very excited, Sabeehah and I, to be joining you for this very exciting boot camp. Both Sabeehah and I are from the Alan Turing Institute, as Hannah said. The Alan Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI, named after Alan Turing, who is really the kind of founder of modern day computer science. So we're really excited to be with you to talk to you a little bit about AI ethics. So to jump right in, I'm going to start a little bit about what we actually mean by AI, kind of what are some common definitions, what are kind of the common inner workings or parts of an AI system. And we'd love to hear from you all as well about AI systems you find in your day-to-day life. I'm going to give an introduction to ethics more generally and kind of how we come to this field of what we call AI ethics. So how we get from the kind of inner workings, the kind of technical of AI plus the ethics to come to AI ethics, which is a really growing field. A lot of organizations are seeing the necessity and the importance of having AI ethics and governance in their companies, in universities, and research institutes. So we'll give you a little bit of insight into that. We'll also give you some key concepts and examples relating to AI ethics and relating to this field. And then as the bootcamp that you all are taking part in has a focus on several SDGs, we decided we would focus some of our attention towards SDG 4, which is about quality education, and give some examples of kind of how AI ethics considerations could find their way into the space of education and why these considerations are really important. So throughout the entire presentation, we will be using Mentimeter, which is a kind of online poll. So anytime you see a slide with a little QR code and a code, you can join online. We'll make sure everyone has the opportunity to do that. And you can just type your responses. It's anonymous. We'd love to hear from you. And then my colleague Sabeehah will kind of share the results live with everyone so we can see what everyone in the room is thinking. And then we'll have a bit of time at the end for discussion and questions. Great. So what do we mean by AI? So this is kind of a big definition, but it talks about how AI systems are algorithmic models. So they're based on some form of mathematical logic or function, but they carry out functions, we say cognitive or perceptual functions that were previously reserved for thinking, judging, and reasoning human beings. So the kind of Cliff Notes version, the short version of this is basically AI is a tool that can help us do tasks that we previously thought were only possible to be done by humans. So we at Alan Turing Institute see AI as a helpful tool. We believe it's a tool that can be used across many different sectors, across many different problem sets. But what's really important is at the end of the day, that there's human accountability for the use of these tools. And so we always advocate for human-centered AI. So AI that has humans at the center, that it's responsible for and accountable for by human decision makers. So you might be asking kind of what are some of the building blocks of AI? So most AI models at this stage, there's obviously lots of different types of AI models, but most of them are comprised of three kind of high level basic kind of building blocks, if you will. So all AI models need a data set, they need data. So this can either be collected for the specific problem, it can be maybe scraped off the internet. There are many different ways to gather data. But it also needs some form of learning algorithm. So somehow, some way to turn that data into some type of output. So this is usually some type of mathematical algorithm, some type of mathematical logic that then concludes in some type of output, which could be classifying things. So maybe like if you're thinking like a spam filter, maybe you're determining if an email is spam or not spam, or maybe you're predicting something. Maybe you're using data to see what the weather might be like in a week's time. So there are lots of different types of outputs of AI systems, but most of them generally consist of these really high level kind of building blocks. So one of the main kind of subsets of artificial intelligence is machine learning, which, as the name kind of implies, there's some type of mathematical logic happening in the middle. So I wanted to kind of share with you maybe 6 main kind of takeaways from what we mean by machine learning. And the first is actually that learning is a very misleading term. Because the way we think of learning as human beings is obviously very different from the way that machines learn. So I'm putting it in quotations because at the end of the day, what's happening is a system is being programmed to do something, right? So you have your data, you have a learning algorithm, and then you have some form of output. So it's not a consciousness thinking that we would do in our kind of daily lives of thinking of how to solve a problem. We might gather some evidence, we might talk to some people and come up with a conclusion. This is very much in machine learning, it's very much an algorithm centered, rules kind of centered, math centered algorithm happening at the core. So as I said, it applies a mathematical function, but it's also pattern based. So machine learning is basically looking through tons of data and trying to answer some form of question. So maybe looking through the past data and saying what has happened in the past and what is likely to happen in the future based off of the data from the past. So it's mapping patterns in that data. And therefore, it's able to make some predictions. So if the data set was saying, across these 5 months, this thing seemed to happen, we could therefore potentially predict that in those months again, with the limited information we have, that same occurrence could happen. So you can see that it's mapping patterns, and to do this, it requires data. And so as I said in the previous slide, the data set is really important, and we call this the training data. So this is the data that the model is trained on in order to make that prediction. So you can imagine that that data set is so important, because if you're only having a small segment of the population you're looking at, or maybe it's a really small data set, then you'd be basing all of your future predictions off of something that maybe isn't representative or isn't recent, for example. And so what we kind of refer to this as is garbage in, garbage out. So if you feed an AI system bad data, or data that's not representative or not recent, you can expect the prediction to also be in that same type of quality. So maybe not recent, not representative. So it's really important to choose good data sets and to choose learning algorithms that will help you get an output that A, answers the question, but B, does it accurately and responsibly. And that's really where kind of we come in terms of AI ethics. So before we get in a little bit more about the field of ethics, you can see the code here. So you can either scan the QR code with your phone or go onto your browser and type in menti.com. The code is right there, 31111473. And just ask all of you, what are some examples of AI systems that you may use or have seen? Cool. Yeah. ChatGPT, Copilot, Apple, SciSpace. Nice. TikTok recommendations, DeepSeek, Gemini. Nice. Lots of good examples. Yeah. Claude. Nice. Great. So it seems like a lot of these examples are generative AI, which is really interesting because this is a type of AI that is quite prevalent at this time, because the products are quite widespread and easy to use, like ChatGPT. But then we have some really specific examples, which are great. So TikTok recommendation, cancer identification, great. And we'll get into some of those. Let's see a few more. Siri, yeah. Great, cool. Keep adding responses, but this is really great. So it seems like everyone's kind of interacting with or has seen examples of AI, which is a really good starting point for the conversation. So we'll head back to the slides now. Great. So here are some other examples of AI that you might have seen. So this is kind of auto text, kind of population when you're going to text and it's giving you suggestions of what the next word might be. That's a type of AI. Google search engine is AI. ChatGPT, which a lot of you had mentioned, that's great. Smart speakers use AI, as well as YouTube. So similar to I think someone said TikTok recommendations, similar thing on YouTube. YouTube recommendations uses AI. So just a few more examples, but seems you all are very familiar. So before we go into ethics, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some really common AI myths. So the first one is that AI is neutral, objective, and fully reliable. And we know that because AI systems are built by biased humans, that there will be bias across the data lifecycle. And it's something that we have to be really careful about. We have to be really careful about making sure our data sets are representative, and that the outcomes are fair. And so saying that just because it's based in maths, it's more objective than humans is not necessarily true, because the same bias we have in our day-to-day lives are embedded in historical biases in data sets and also in the decision making when teams decide to build AI models. The second one is that AI will solve all of our problems, and this is often referred to as techno-solutionism. And this is a myth for several reasons. One is that sometimes building some type of technology to solve a really massive problem can often be kind of like a plaster you're putting on to mask root causes and problems, and saying that this technology can solve all of these really long-standing kind of structural inequalities. So it's not to say that technology can't support solving those issues, but obviously it takes more than just a technology or a tool. And also sometimes it risks experimenting with AI for the sake of innovation. So this kind of, let's just see what we can do with technology. And maybe we could have used those resources in other ways that could have had more of an impact. The third myth is that AI can replace humans and make better decisions. And this is a myth for several reasons. One is that, similar to what I said previously, AI replicates past mistakes or biases. But also there's always human accountability. So who is responsible when things go wrong with the model? It's whoever built the model or whatever company decided to deploy the model. There's always some form of human accountability and responsibility in the decision making behind these systems. And then the last one, sorry, is that AI will be smart and intelligent enough to take over. And the answer to this one is that we're just really bad at predicting AI. And so that's something we should all remember. We've been quite bad in the past of predicting technology in the future. So it's important for us to keep that in mind moving forward. Great. So I'm going to give now an introduction to ethics, which is its own field in its own right. But kind of what we do in our team at the Alan Turing Institute is we blend this field of ethics and this growing kind of interest in field of artificial intelligence into this really kind of interesting cross section called AI ethics. So this might look a little bit daunting. I don't know. I'm a big flowchart person, so I like when things are in boxes and look like they're flowing in one direction. But I don't expect anyone to have seen this before, but it's just really a high level intro. I have formal training as an ethicist, so this is really interesting to me, is like why we determine which things are right and which things are wrong. So when we start all the way from the beginning, we look at what we call meta ethics, which is really the nature of ethics. So where do all individuals have different answers to these questions, by the way. This is quite a subjective thing, ethics. Meta ethics basically asks, where do we have the basis for what is right or wrong? So some people might believe this comes from a set of rules that were determined a long time ago. Maybe some people think it comes from certain religious practices. Maybe some people think it comes from culture. These are all different basis points, starting points for how to even begin to determine what is right or wrong. And then we move into the content of ethics, which we refer to as normative ethical theories. So this is really how in our day-to-day we determine what is right or wrong. So once again, my perspective on this could be completely different from my friends, my colleagues, from all of you. But there are usually four main kind of categories. The first is called deontology, which is like a rules-based. You follow a set of rules or principles to guide whether or not something you think is right or wrong. Consequentialism, sorry, the M has run off on its own adventure there, but consequentialism basically means the consequences are what is most important. So it's not necessarily about how you get to an answer, it's about the end itself. So one of the most common forms of consequentialism is called utilitarianism, which is like, as long as the greatest good for the greatest number of people is achieved, it doesn't really matter the kind of process to get there. It's about the outcomes. Virtue ethics is about prioritizing a set of virtues that you believe kind of are really important and should take prevalence over many other things. So for example, if I prioritize honesty as a virtue, I might determine what is right or wrong based off of making sure that I'm honest in that situation. That's how I would kind of make that determination. And then finally, we have biocentric ethics, which is prioritizing the biosphere, prioritizing the flourishing of nature. So you can see these are kind of, this is not all of them. This is just 4 ways that people might make the determination of whether something is right or wrong. And so all of this leads to what we call practical ethics, which is actually what do we actually do if we are given a situation. So you might be thinking, how do we basically take all of this information, take all of the people in the world who have very different perspectives on this, and boil this down into something that can actually be quite actionable. And that's where we get into AI ethics. So AI ethics is important for several reasons, but we want to hear from you what you think, and then I'll answer that question that I left you on a cliffhanger of how do we actually get there. So feel free to type your response. Why do you think we need AI ethics? Okay, so we have to regulate language used by people. I'd be interested to know if that's in more of a platform basis or what kind of is meant. Feel free to type. I think you can type twice, so feel free to type another one as well. You can answer us on every question. Okay. Why else might we need the field of AI ethics? If you think about all of the AI uses that you all mentioned in your daily life, why do you think it might be important to have some type of consideration of ethics? We'll give it a few more seconds. This is kind of a tough question. Keep humans at the center, to stop people being harmed. Yeah, these are good answers. We have some thumbs up in the corner. A lot, it looks like a lot of thumbs up. They're flying off the screen. Okay, great. Less bias, data still are biases to use it responsibly. Yeah, these are all really fantastic. Great. Make sure how to use AI morally with responsibility. Lots of stuff about bias, responsibility, stopping harms, keeping humans at the center. Great. Fantastic. All right. Let's see what we think on this one. Avoid bias and harmful stereotypes. Oh, ensure fairness. Oh, they're still coming in. These are so great. Prevent harm, bias, and misuse. Fantastic. Structure data and help teachers. Wonderful. Thank you all for engaging with that. We'll come back to this, I'm sure, in the discussion. So why do we need AI ethics? And many of you touched on a lot of these points, so thank you for that. The first one is that technology is socio-technical in nature. What we mean by that, it's kind of a big word that I hadn't heard until I moved into this field, is that technology doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's designed by humans. It involves data about humans. And so because of that, we need to think about questions like what should or should we not do in a given context. And also in what context or for what purposes should AI not be deployed or be deployed? So if we're thinking of like safety critical sectors, maybe in like healthcare, are there certain use cases where maybe AI is not the best answer? These are the types of questions that AI ethics helps us to answer. And also, finally, it's important to note that it's not the same as legal compliance. So, we have GDPR, we have data protection, which are really important. But those are obviously things that are mandated that we must do. And it's not the same as thinking through problems and thinking, should we or should we not do this? What are the impacts on people? That has more to do with ethics. So as I said, I kind of left you with that big question of how do we join together the fact that individuals have very different opinions on how they determine what is right or wrong. How do we move from that to actually being able to do something in practice? And the way we do that is we think about potential harms that could result from an AI system being misused or developed in the wrong way. So a few of these examples are things like bias, injustice, discrimination. We also have like breaches of data integrity, privacy, and security. And then loss of human connection and empathy. This is something that might happen, for example, if a person thinks they're engaging with another human being, but actually they've just been engaging with an AI chatbot. That can be quite dehumanizing in a lot of ways if it's not made clear to you. And so we start from this point, also using grounding in human rights. So we do a lot of work with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to look at how to prevent these harms. And the way we do this is by making certain principles very practical. and allow them to be measured in the design, development, and deployment of AI systems. So if I say AI ethics often focuses on key principles, do you all think you could think of some examples of what some of these principles might be? And a few of you have said some of them already. So there's no wrong answer by any means, but feel free to share on Menti. So these are, you just do one word principles, try to think of as many as you can. Transparency, great first one. Yeah, fantastic. Really important. All right, let's see what others think. It's a bit of a tough question as well. So we're giving you a bit of a challenge with our Q&A today. Accountability in the chat, thanks for that. Perfect. Yeah, unbiased, fairness, nice. Common sense, I like that. Yeah, that's awesome. I would completely second that as a principle we should have. Unbiased again, morality, yeah. So morality could also link with maybe fairness as well. Great. See if we can get a few more. Privacy, trust in the chat. Great ones. Humanity, that's nice. Privacy, fact checking, nice. Fairness in the chat. Awesome. I think you all have seen the slides already, huh? Accountability, nice. Yeah, beneficence, very good. Great. Well, this is a really solid start. You all are going to see in the next slide that you've captured a large amount of them. Great. I think I saw clearness at the end. I like that. I think that has to do with transparency too. Great. So back to the slides. You all have mentioned, I think, almost all of these. So well done. Privacy, accountability, safety and security. I saw transparency, fairness. Great. So these are kind of there's lots of principles, but I would say these are kind of the core principles that continuously come up and are kind of the centered principles for AI ethics. And what this allows us to do is kind of action these principles. So we can say, in order for an AI system to be, insert principle, transparent, for example, we want to make sure that the decision-making behind the data we chose, behind how we processed it, is made clear to the end user. That could be one example. So there are ways to, we say assure, which basically just means make sure these principles actually are enacted throughout the AI lifecycle. So that is one way that we kind of reconcile kind of people's personal views about ethics and the field, is by focusing on harms and then using the principles to prevent those harms. Great, so I'm now going to pass over to Sabeehah to talk about some key concepts and examples related to the field of AI ethics. Over to you.
Thanks, Morgan. So now you've heard all about what AI is and also what AI ethics is and why it's needed. And we touched briefly on what the principles are. So now we'll look at some real-life examples and also what are the real-world implications if AI ethics is not considered. But before that, I'd like to show a short video with you about AI ethics.
When people wonder what is AI, they think about robots.
Robots.
Let's make a distinction. The robot itself is hardware. AI is software.
What is artificial intelligence? Systems that mimic, perhaps even go beyond our own ability to think and to process information.
It determines who we want to date, whether we get a certain kind of loan, operating at all levels of our economy, in the political realm, in the judicial system, employment practices, in the educational system. All of these decisions help to determine how well or how poorly our lives go, and increasingly, AI is involved in those decisions. We are right to be concerned when we are just now learning to think about the social and ethical implications of using AI.
So many of our own stories are about the relationship between the creation and the creator.
So we're at this inflection point right now. Suddenly, all of this data, these algorithms, and the computational power is available.
And that's really been the breakthrough.
Things are becoming real that we've talked about, we've dreamt about for decades. AI which can do a very specific, narrow task.
That can recognize voice, navigate a car, translate language. And if this is going to be the ubiquitous tool,
we're doing ourselves a disservice by not educating the general population also on what is really going on right now.
We have so many immediate concerns about the kind of AI that will be developed that we really need to devote most of our educational efforts to those kinds of problems. Artificial intelligence uses a massive amount of data to recognize certain kinds of patterns that are correlated with a successful result.
Hidden in these vast pools of data that we're now using are remarkable opportunities to run off the rails.
So we have to be careful about the data we give it.
Data.
Data can be bad because it's not been properly labeled, because it's inaccurate, because it has baked into it certain human biases that are naturally a part of society.
One clear example of data bias is the use of algorithms to make decisions about the fate of prisoners.
If you have enough data points, you should be able to judge a person's likelihood of reoffending. Well, the problem is,
if there is bias hidden in the data, your outcome in the judicial system may be very different than someone who's upper middle class and white.
Why is it projecting higher risk scores onto Black defendants? It often turns out that the algorithm itself isn't feeding on any data that's explicitly labeled in terms of race. A zip code doesn't tell you anything about a person's race. What the machine learns is, people in this zip code are more likely to be criminal, when in fact it may just be that they're more likely to be Black or poor or any other category that is a subject of biased practices.
These technologies will actually reinforce some of the worst aspects of our society, which is really a great tragedy because the technology has the potential to actually do exactly the opposite.
Machines aren't racist, machines aren't sexist, machines aren't ableist or classist. We are.
That's a picture of a cat because of the ears and the tail, the whisker and the nose and all that.
the machine itself starts to recognize that such and such is a cat and such is not a cat.
We don't actually know how the circuit has reached that particular set of conclusions.
Hot dog, not hot dog, whatever. That's funny. Fire missile, not fire missile. That's not funny.
What I see is a generation that takes all kinds of life instructions from its device, whether it is where to go to eat Korean barbecue or who to marry. It all comes magically out of the palm of your hand from an algorithm that you know nothing about.
Who's behind that screen? Who's on the other end of the wire?
What are the motivations of the algorithm? People no longer even think to ask. It's just so convenient.
That ability to predict and then modify our behavior, perhaps even without us fully understanding why or how.
If you want the machine to behave in an ethical manner, you have to know why it does what it does.
We must develop responsible and safe practices before the power gets too unmanageable for us to control. Whose responsibility is it? Is it corporations, government? Is it society? And it's really all of us.
There would probably be scientists and technologists who say, I'm not going to let any consideration stop me from my investigation of the world we live in. We all have to together say, is that a road we want to go down?
Human responsibility for human power.
Well, I hope you found that interesting, and I think there were some important questions and considerations that were highlighted, including how an algorithm works, but also possible implications of incorrect classifications and predictions. And you can watch the full video if you are interested on YouTube. So now moving on to algorithmic bias, which is one of the impacts and outcomes if AI ethics has not been fully considered in the design, development, and deployment of AI systems. So before I get into this, would anyone like to share what do they think algorithmic bias means, or maybe share an example? You can type it in the chat. And while I give you a minute to think about that, feel free to keep sending in any suggestions or ideas in the chat. So I'll briefly explain what algorithmic bias is. So an algorithm requires input data to produce an output, and this is something we've been talking about throughout today. Now, algorithmic bias simply means that the algorithms are trained to identify patterns from data sets which are either incomplete or biased, and therefore produce outputs which unfairly favor some groups over others. These biases can sneak into our everyday technology like search engines or social media feeds without us even realizing it. So if we look on the slide here, you'll notice that the bar graphs shown here indicate how often AI or how AI often links men with higher paying occupations than women. And if we think about what would the real world implication of this be? Well, firstly, it would negatively affect the way women and young girls think about themselves. But it may also influence the opportunities that are shown to women. And these may be different to those that are shown for men, because these are influenced also by our search patterns and what we see based on based on the algorithm. And so this could ultimately result in limiting career advancement for women. But also, further than that, it could potentially lead to exacerbating the gender pay gap. And if we also think about the users of AI systems, for example, in 2023, Statista found that male users of ChatGPT represented up to 65% of total users. And so that means women were made up probably only about 35% of the total users. And this if we consider just in terms of the audience of these systems and the information that they are receiving, then if biased content is generated and shown to a largely male-dominated audience, there is a significant risk of perpetuating inequality and reinforcing stereotypes. If we move on to the next slide. So another impact, unfortunately, of not upholding AI ethics principles is that of discriminatory outcomes. Now, for instance, the middle article by Stanford Law on how will AI impact racial disparities in education. So this article discusses how universities that use AI enrollment algorithms may use past application data, which includes test results, zip codes, socioeconomic status, and other variables that are not usually disclosed to determine funding and future enrollments. Now, even though these categories are race neutral, similar to what we heard in the video, where race is not specifically identified, is not specifically a category in the data, the outcomes may still be discriminatory. And this would happen for instance, because in this particular example, Black and Latino students have historically scored lower on the math section of the SATs compared to white and Asian students. And so the AI algorithm may allocate more scholarship funding to white and Asian students rather than Black and Latino students. Another implication would be in terms of access. So not everyone has the same access to AI, and specifically in terms of in education. And this really has a significant risk in terms of inequality. So for example, students in rural or underfunded schools may lack access to AI-powered tutoring platforms and even just learning about AI, while wealthier institutions can integrate these topics and also these technologies into their education syllabus to enhance learning outcomes. Now, this further widens the gap in the education system, but also this applies to children and youth all around the world, where some students will receive more help and have a better chance of succeeding in their careers, and others won't. And then moving on to the next slide. So it's also really important to consider the real-world implication of biospheric harm. And ignoring the ethical and responsible use of AI, it may not only harm humans, as we've just been discussing, but it also can have a significant negative impact on the environment. Now, biospheric harm is often spoken about less in the media than some of the other examples that I just shared with you, but is equally, if maybe not more important. For instance, one study found that training Google's main large language model produces emissions equivalent to that of a transatlantic flight. And the training of GPT-3 used approximately 700,000 liters of fresh water. So amongst the hype of the benefit of these technologies, it is important to remember to weigh the perceived benefits against the impact to the environment. Another example is one conversation with ChatGPT generally uses around 500 moles of water, or the equivalent of a plastic bottle of water. And if you think about the impact that this would have on the environment and the number of ChatGPT users around the world, it is really significant. Unfortunately, when it comes to biospheric harm and climate change, those communities who stand to benefit the least from these AI systems are often the ones most at risk of being impacted by climate change. So when you think of AI ethics in the real world, I'd say remember that when it comes to AI, lines of code are what shapes people's experiences, and people's experiences ultimately shape their lives. I'll pass back to Morgan.
Thanks, Sabeehah. So as Sabeehah has illustrated, we've just given kind of 3 examples, which is not exhaustive by any means of AI ethics, but it just shows you kind of really concrete examples of the types of things we work on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, our daily work at the National Institute for Data Science and AI involves really trying to make sure that where AI tools are used, that they don't exacerbate inequality, that they don't contribute to you know, negative aspects of damaging the environment. You know, these are real things that we're working on, and to us, it's really important that this field continues to exist and does exist as a career opportunity for folks who are interested in technology, but also really interested in kind of the societal implications of technology. So the last part of the presentation, we're just going to zero in a little bit more on, as I said at the beginning, SDG 4, which is about quality education. So before we give a little bit about how AI ethics might be related to this space, we wanted to hear from you about some potential ethical considerations for AI systems that might be introduced into the education space. And thank you for everyone typing in the chat and the Q&A. These are really great questions and comments as well. We'll hopefully get to some of them at the end. So what do you think might be important to consider if an AI system is going to be deployed in an education space? What are some things that you might consider if you were the one developing the system, or if you were going to use the system in an education space? So we have plagiarism rules, important, harmful bias, 2 important ones. Maybe you can think about if your school is using any AI tools, or if they're thinking about it, what are some things that might be important to you for you to know, or you to be aware of if you are interacting with the tool at school? Fact checking, human feelings, jobs for educators. Yeah, this is approaching lots of different angles to this topic, which is really important. And also something that's really important in the field of AI ethics is trying to approach it from a lot of different viewpoints and angles. Learn just to understand AI more. Filtering harsh language. Yep, so that's kind of around safety. Yep. See if we can get a few more, and then we'll go back over to a bit of a discussion. Crafting different types of teaching. Yeah, that's a really important one. There's a lot of potential opportunities for personalized learning. Yeah, AI benefits all students, including those with disabilities. It's a great point. That gets to the point of fairness, inclusivity, really important. Great. So just to say a few, these are just some of the ethical considerations, but you know, there are lots of different ones, and sometimes you might find one topic more interesting than others. So obviously Sabeehah had pointed to carbon emissions and water footprints. So when we're thinking of things, especially with generative AI, things like ChatGPT, we have to be mindful of the potential impact on the environment. There's also a lot of data privacy and data collection concerns, especially relating to young people, of how the tools that are deployed in educational spaces might be collecting data on young people, sometimes without their consent, but also to train future models, especially if young people think that information is to be kept confidential, and then it's not. That's a really difficult challenge to face. There could also be, I know a lot of you folks had mentioned bias, but as Sabeehah said, depending on how the models have been trained and who's using the models, it might perpetuate really harmful stereotypes about certain groups of people, about certain jobs, about certain geographies, cultures, etc. So it's really important for us to be mindful of how tools might continue kind of already existing discrimination. There's also the concern that some teachers have that the AI tools will create lessons that are interesting, but they're not necessarily aligned to national education goals. So they might be really interesting and informative, but they're not actually helping young people prepare for their assessments, for example, because they haven't been trained on maybe the entire curriculum, for example, or the objectives of the curriculum. As Sabeehah had mentioned and others have mentioned as well, there's also the fear that these tools could widen the digital divide, which means that the schools that have access to AI systems might have more access to learning opportunities than the schools that may not have internet access or may not have access to the tools. And that's a big ethical consideration, I think, that we always have to keep in mind. A few of you mentioned kind of harmful content. It's a really important one because we know that almost all of these tools have not been developed with children in mind as users. So if we have young people accessing tools that weren't developed for them, there is a tendency that they could come into contact with quite harmful and not age-appropriate material, which you can imagine would be quite concerning in a school environment. We work a lot with young people, Sabeehah and I, and one of the main concerns that has kind of always been brought to our attention is students' fear that it might limit their creativity or affect their creativity and problem-solving skills if they're always able to kind of pop something into ChatGPT and get an immediate answer. What are kind of the long-term effects on how they think through problems and try to solve problems themselves? And then the last kind of few are sometimes when we try to solve one SDG, we might end up negating progress towards another one. So for example, in this case, perhaps there are some really, really positive impacts on and progress towards quality education by, for example, allowing personalized education that helps neurodiverse students learn in more effective ways. But at the same time, perhaps it might cause kind of harm to the SDG relating to solving climate change, right? So you can see there's always trade-offs with how we kind of progress towards SDGs. It's just something to be considerate of. And then a few of you have mentioned transparency and consent. So if these tools are used in education spaces, did the young people and the parents and carers and teachers consent to those tools collecting data? And is that data collection transparent? Do people know how that data is being used? And then global justice is a very similar kind of point to the digital divide, but Sabeehah made a really interesting point and a really important point about how those most impacted by climate change often don't get to receive any kind of benefits from the AI tools themselves. And I think that's really important to think about when we think about AI in the education space as well, is how are we making these tools inclusive and able to be used by the largest amount of people out there, while also being mindful of the ethical considerations. So just to say, they seem like a lot, and I think what's really important for us to stress is that we believe that AI can be a tool that's used for good. We really fundamentally do believe that. But it's really important to be mindful of these considerations from the outset. And so some of you might end up being AI developers or AI engineers or anything of that sort, which is so exciting. And I think, you're going to be the ones that could be in a room having this conversation saying, hey, did we think about potential biased outcomes of the model? How can we make sure that doesn't happen? The more we have these conversations, the more we can actually use AI as a tool that's beneficial for people. And so our job is really to help data scientists, to help AI engineers, to help project teams use AI in a responsible way. We're definitely not saying don't use AI, the whole tool is horrible, never use it. We're not saying that at all. We're just saying you have to be really responsible and accountable for the outcomes that may come from using these tools in domains that affect people's lives. Like Sabeehah said, these are real impacts. And so our job is both very interesting, but also, we have to be really hopeful that we can use these tools to provide benefits. And we know that you all share in that belief, which is really exciting to us. I wanted to pose a question and just ask you all what you think the future of AI ethics might look like. And then we'll just end with a video that I'm excited to show you of what some young people think about this topic. So we have governments will enforce ethical AI use. That would be a positive outcome. That's great. What do others think? What is the future? More laws on AI? Hopefully better. Yeah. I think it's always important to be optimistic and try to improve the whole domain. Strict and effective. Okay. People won't worry about privacy breaches. Yeah. Virtual solutions in here. Usage with responsibility. Let's see if we can get a few more. Oh, nice. We have a big answer. I'll read. Regulatory frameworks, enhanced transparency, interdisciplinary collaboration. That's great. Great, interesting. All right. So someone's saying it won't be as accessible as of right now. It'll be appropriate use, open data, open models, policies and practices that improve the use of AI without taking away creativity. Yeah, these are really great. Thank you, everyone. Awesome. More accurate. Nice. Cool. These are really great. It's nice to see the hopeful attitude and towards the future. I think that's always really important, and it's, I think, something Sabeehah and I consider every day is how we can keep making impacts in the space. So before I play this video, just to give a little bit of context, Sabeehah and I at the Alan Turing Institute, we hosted the world's first Children's AI Summit just a few weeks ago, and we put together this film with a really fantastic film production company that really showcases some young people's thoughts from the day centered around education, mental health, and the environment. And you might share some of these opinions, you might not, but we thought we would share what some other of your peers are thinking in the space. And we have a manifesto that was produced with children that you can definitely read to see kind of what are some of the calls to actions for world leaders. So I'll play the video, and then that's kind of, I think, the end for us. Here we go.
We do know what we're talking about. We are living through it right now, and we have a pretty good understanding, as pretty much as soon as we were out the womb, we were born in the world of AI.
You may be the ones making the decisions, but the consequences are being suffered by us.
Exactly.
So please consider the youth, consider our safety and our jobs, our rights,
our mental
privacy,
health.
and mental health, yes.
Children are finally getting their voices heard when it comes to AI. The goal of this summit is to get everyone involved, kind of share their message with the world as well.
AI is being developed so quickly in a way that is so hard for corporations and our own government to catch up with how the AI is developed.
We should have rules for AI. We need to make sure that it is able to do amazing things that it can do, but make sure that it is not used in dangerous ways.
As some young people are more deprived than others, and the digital divide is also a problem, having AI to bridge that gap between young people around the world would definitely be a big impact on everyone.
If it were overused in the education system, then it would take away valuable social interactions between students and teachers and mentors, and might give people an over-reliance on these easy, quick resources.
AI won't be there to take our exams for us. It can help us along the way, but it will not always be there to go on that journey for us.
Could there be lessons directly on AI to recognize what AI is, how to use it, but how to use it safely?
Mental health issues are rising a lot. Having an AI chatbot maybe just to talk to, and knowing that that information won't go anywhere is going to be so helpful. I don't think AI will ever be able to replicate the creativity and imagination that humans have.
Humans can understand each other, and I know it may seem a lot like AI can understand you, but it can't, because it's a machine.
AI does have a big carbon footprint. You've got to be careful about that.
Try and minimize the damage that the AI does to the environment. For example, its water use, its waste products emitted, and try to minimize as much as possible, if not eradicate it completely.
A very important way it can make the world a better place is by enabling humans to do more, to think faster, and to explore new concepts and technologies, making humanity a stronger, better people than we already are.
Please listen to the teenagers, listen to the children, because these are going to be the people that drive our future.
We stand on the brink of an era that is defined by artificial intelligence.
However, I feel that the very people whose futures AI will determine do not have a say in how it is used. We are speaking to you because we have been thinking a lot about artificial intelligence, or AI.
Its potential to transform education, healthcare, and climate change is enormous.
We would be incredibly grateful if you would acknowledge and put our thoughts into action, as we believe this will help our community on Earth and the generations to come.
Thank you all for your time and for inviting us. And sometimes we do wonder what Alan Turing would think of AI today.
Great. So yes, we encourage you all, if you're interested, to read our Children's Manifesto for the Future of AI, which you might find interesting. You might relate to some of it, but we would also, love to hear from you. So thank you so much for engaging with us and for being so participative in the polls and everything. It's been really great to hear your thoughts and opinions. So yeah, thank you on behalf of Sabeehah and I, and yeah, we're excited for some questions.
Starting with the first question, can the growing success of AI in coming years affect the relation among humans?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think for these types of things, it's really important to kind of do the research we're doing where we're engaging with young people, for example, because young people like yourselves are really the only generation to grow up in the world of AI. I mean, Sabeehah and I experienced it kind of later on in our lives, but we didn't have it in schools when we were your age. So in terms of kind of human relationships and those bits, these are still things that we're trying to really understand, because AI is growing, but it's only been with us in kind of a commercial way, and that's been accessible by lots of people for not so long. So the work we're doing in schools, for example, is really trying to ask young people, if they feel like it's having any impact on how they engage with their peers or how they engage with themselves and how they think of themselves as well. There's a lot of stuff around kind of self-confidence related to AI and how to form friendships and all of these things. So we do think there will be some form of impact, just because with every form of new technology, it does impact in some way how we relate to the world and how we relate to each other. But in terms of kind of concrete evidence, we're still really waiting to kind of see with kind of the longer AI is around. But what's really important is making sure that, for example, it's really clear when you're engaging with an AI system, because these do have long-term impacts on kind of self-perception and how we form relationships. If we know that we're engaging with an AI system versus another peer or a human, is really important. Sabeehah, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that one.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important questions that honestly needs to be considered in how these systems are already being developed. And like Morgan said, I think the answer will come with time. But I think we can already see certain things in society already. So the way these systems are being designed are intentionally being designed in a way that keeps people continuously using them. So it's designed in an addictive way. And this is done, this is done intentionally, thinking about certain chemicals that are released in the mind and designing in a way to keep the user engaged for the longest possible time. Now, would that mean that people are engaged on these platforms, speaking to other people? Would that mean that this is taking them away from other social interactions that they would have had if they were not on these platforms or, using these devices? And I think I think we can already see that around us and even individually for ourselves, and observe the differences in behavior. And I think that's really the important thing, is be aware of what's going on around you, how you're spending your time, and those around you as well. And yeah, the main answer we'll know in the future, but it's definitely something to think about, both on an individual and a group level.
Machines are fair and lack the ability to bias. Is it an advantage or disadvantage that AI has no sense of human feelings or empathy?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting one, and it gets back to that myth around kind of AI systems being objective and fully reliable. And I think as nice as it would be to say that AI systems are fair, we actually can't say that with any real concrete evidence, just because we know that the outputs of AI systems do have the ability to produce biased outcomes. And that's because of several reasons. It's because it's built by biased humans, but also the data that is often used to train these systems is also biased. So the outcomes of AI systems, unfortunately, do have bias in them and are often unfair. So in terms of the second question about empathy, I think, that is one of the most important parts of being human, in my opinion, is the ability to have empathy and connect with others. So I still think that will always be an advantage on the part of human beings designing these systems, and will hopefully make us be able to create fairer systems. So just to say, I think that's why kind of this field is really important, is to try to minimize the bias and disadvantages to groups of people and to all people.
Sabeehah and Morgan, thank you for being here today. A huge thank you to our corporate partners, Sage, Sage Foundation, and Red Hat for making this event possible.